There was a time when power wore a crown. Kings commanded armies, minted coins, and decided who lived comfortably and who starved. If a ruler wanted to wage war, build monuments, or expand borders, he issued orders, and the state obeyed. But slowly, quietly, that kind of power began to slip away. Not through rebellion, not through assassination, but through debt. This is the story of how banks did what armies could not, how they outgrew kings, outlasted empires, and came to shape the modern world from behind ledgers instead of thrones. In the medieval world, kings ruled land, but they rarely controlled money. Gold and silver moved independently of borders, carried by merchants who answered to profit, not crowns. Wars were expensive, unpredictable, and constant, and monarchs, no matter how powerful, faced a simple problem. They ran out of cash long before they ran out of ambition. To solve this, rulers borrowed. At first, lending to kings was dangerous. A monarch could simply refuse to repay or imprison his creditors. Many did. In 14th century England, King Edward III defaulted on massive loans from Italian banking families, bankrupting entire firms overnight. The lesson was clear. Raw power made kings unreliable borrowers. So bankers adapted. Instead of confronting kings, they entangled them. In Renaissance Italy, families like the Medici didn't overthrow rulers, they financed them. By controlling tax collection, currency exchange, and state accounts, banks became indispensable. A king who wanted stability needed credit. A king who wanted war needed loans. And a king who defaulted would find himself unable to raise funds ever again. Power was shifting from force to access. By the early modern period, this relationship matured. States realized they could borrow not just from individuals, but from markets. Government bonds were born. Instead of begging a single banker, kings could now tap entire financial systems. In exchange, they promised regular interest payments backed by future taxes. This was revolutionary. For the first time, states could wage wars far larger than their treasuries allowed. Britain perfected this model. While continental powers relied on plunder and conquest, Britain built credibility. Its parliament guaranteed debt repayment. Its central bank stabilized markets. Investors trusted British bonds even when debt soared beyond imagination. By the 18th century, Britain wasn't winning wars because it had better generals. It was winning because it could outspend everyone else. And behind that spending power stood banks. Napoleon understood this too late. He could dominate battlefields, but he couldn't dominate credit. France relied on forced contributions, conscription, and extraction from conquered territories. Britain relied on loans, and those loans kept flowing even during defeat. When wars became global and prolonged, finance, not firepower, decided the outcome. Kings still ruled, but bankers decided how long. The 19th century sealed the transformation. As industrialization expanded economies, banks became the nervous system of states. They controlled capital flows, funded infrastructure, and managed government debt. Central banks emerged as stabilizers and gatekeepers. Crucially, they were insulated from politics. A king could be overthrown, a parliament dissolved, but a bank, especially one trusted by markets, endured. This separation gave financial institutions a form of power no crown could match: continuity. By the time of absolute monarchies faded, the transition was complete. Power no longer sat entirely at the top of the political hierarchy. It moved sideways into institutions that didn't campaign, didn't wear uniforms, and didn't need popular support. They needed confidence. The 20th century made this undeniable. World wars forced governments into unprecedented debt. banks and bond markets became essential to survival. Central banks coordinated currencies, controlled inflation, and acted as lenders of last resort. When crises hit, governments didn't command banks, they negotiated with them. And after 1971, when money detached from gold, the final restraint vanished. Without metal backing, states became fully dependent on credit systems. Debt could expand indefinitely, but only as long as markets believed in repayment. That belief wasn't enforced by kings, it was enforced by banks, rating agencies, and financial credibility. By the time of the 2008 financial crisis, the hierarchy was clear. Governments didn't rescue banks because they wanted to, they rescued them because they had to. The collapse of major financial institutions threatened the entire system. States issued trillions in guarantees, bailouts, and liquidity, not to protect citizens first, but to keep the financial architecture alive. In that moment, it became obvious. Banks were no longer servants of power, they were pillars of it. This doesn't mean bankers rule the world in secret rooms. It means modern power is structural, not personal. Banks influence what is possible. They decide which projects get funded, which governments can borrow cheaply, and which economies survive shocks. Kings once controlled land and armies. Banks now control time, the future obligations of entire societies. And unlike kings, banks don't need loyalty, they need compliance. History doesn't say this happened because bankers were evil. It happened because complexity replaced authority. As economies grew too large to manage directly, control moved to systems that could scale. When banks became more powerful than kings, the crown didn't fall. It simply stopped being the center of gravity. And in a world ruled by credit, the most powerful force isn't the one that commands, it's the one that lends. If this reframed how you see power, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.